garden itself was quite fascinating. But it was to me the real draw of the second act was the tower itself. It was tall, 150 feet. It was described, befitting the abode of a mighty spellcaster, the priest of what's his name? Yara.
Yara, that's right. Yara is this terrible wizard that is also mentioned
Mm-hmm.
in part one, or he's sometimes referred to as sort of like some sorcerer, but then he's also referred to as a priest. So he seems to have many different masks that he wears for the society, and he's sort of very much feared by um, people of this land, not just this city, but everybody seems to know who Yara is.
Yes, and throughout the description of the entire second act, you can see hints of who Yara, the York, is supposed to be.
Hmm.
Well, not who Yara is supposed to be, but more like the source of his power, which is very fascinating, which we will come to later on. But you can see scattered throughout the entire description, things like that, you know, and and while Conan was exploring the garden, he was surprised by another man who had already stolen into the garden, described as a bit portly, with a big belly, and who calls himself um, the Prince of Thieves, Taurus the Nemedian. And so while in the garden, they got past a bunch of lions. You know, stole past the guards, got past a bunch of lions, which the Nemedian had taken care of with some really potent venom. And as they were climbing up the tower, which was described as festooned with all manners of gems, they soon found themselves on the roof, which was as richly decorated as everywhere else, but made of some kind of a silvery material that the walls of the tower was built with. And a discerning reader here might surmise that the silvery metal might in fact be aluminium or titanium. And all was quiet as the duo crept towards the chamber. And throughout this entire passage, Robert E. Howard continually impresses us with the decadence of Yara the priest by the way he described the tower. It's tall and glittering and luxurious to the point of vulgarity, and perhaps an indirect way of developing the character of the evil priest himself, because we don't get to interact much with Yara except through hearsay, and I would call this environmental storytelling, which
Mm.
is something that a gamer would know instantly if they played any Bethesda games. It's a very powerful way of telling story that is not, it's very indirect, and I love environmental storytelling because it allows the reader to connect the dots in his or her mind, and I think that is very important in engaging the reader. But back to Conan, you know. So when Conan and the Nemedian Taurus reached the chamber where the heart of the elephant, which is the thing that they were here to steal, uh, the Nemedian pushed Conan away, told Conan to go look for guards, at this point in time, we can see, although Conan was suspicious of the Nemedians, maybe the Nemedian wanted to keep the jewel for himself, or something like that. He went ahead and did it anyway. And throughout this entire story, you could see, the reader could see that Conan at this stage in his life is maybe a little bit naive and unused to civilized ways. And I use the word civilized quite loosely because that also carries the baggage of deceit and treachery along with it. But while Conan was away looking for guards that might happen onto them, there came a cry from within the chamber, and as Conan was rushing towards the chamber, he saw the Nemedian clutching at his neck, falling to the ground, dead. And our barbarian, the Cimmerian, he was stunned by this, of course, and he examined Taurus's body to see what had killed him. And this is part of where, um, again, the way Robert E. Howard writes his story, he plants clues, um, and allows the reader to the chance to draw some conclusion before he actually tells the rest of the story to the reader, which is there were no wounds on the Nemedian's body except for a few puncture wounds on the neck. And you could see the way Conan does his detective work. You know, like he was feeling the body. There were no other wounds. There was except the puncture wounds, but then the puncture wounds were there was nothing in the puncture wounds. There was no dart, nothing that suggested that the the whatever had killed the Taurus had came from some kind of trap, and he was still in the midst of working it out. Uh, you know, and he stepped into the the chamber when the real threat announced itself by the way of an ambush. It was a giant spider, and quite frankly, anyone who has been paying attention to the story at this point would have realized that it was a giant spider, just because of the way the wounds was described, the position of the wound on Taurus's neck, you know, and this part, um, I have to say I really love this part because when Robert E. Howard described the action, it was very clear, you know. Uh, when Conan did battle with the spider, it was a close fight, and Robert E. Howard took care to portray that because one touch from the spider's venom and Conan would have been dead. And so the entire fight scene was very dynamic. Uh, Robert E. Howard described the action quite well, you know, with making use of space, the space within the room itself, and then describing the actions quite vividly, including the way Conan moved. It's almost like a dancer himself. And the way Conan dealt with the threat with killing the spider was not. I like the fact that he didn't deal with it in a straightforward way, like just take the sword and plunge it into the spider. He took a chest because it was trapped in the web that the spider was starting to spin, and he took a chest and he threw it at the spider, and the missile hit the spider, and that was when he finished off the creature. Uh, and after defeating the spider, he looked around the room. The room was filled with riches, um, but with all those riches that decorated the room, um, it was the I mean, in his mind, with all the riches that were already in the room, how much more valuable could the heart of the elephant be? And therefore, he explored further to find a way to get to the treasure, the real treasure of the Tower of the Elephant.